It's different to do these things in person. It's been a long time, so it's good to see you all in 3 dimensions. Thank you for being here today. My name is Michael Wright. I'm Vice President for Communications and Chief of Staff, and I'll introduce the President. And usually my introductions are about the logistics of the day, but since the President is getting toward the end of his tenure, I'm going to do something that maybe is a little different and probably he wouldn't approve of, but I just want to say a couple of things. Other than that, he is the 12th president of the university, or cherry-picked from his prodigious CV, which we've all talked about. And by the way, which includes now, last week he was told he is now a member of the Academy of Arts and Science, American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So we don't have to go through all the stuff that he does, but because we know that. But I was thinking about today and remembering that when the president was inaugurated by Judge Damon Keith, Judge Keith said, to be a great institution, you must be a good institution. And if you stop being good, you will cease to be great. And I know the president has taken that to heart because he's referenced it a few times as early as or as recently as just a few weeks ago. And it occurred to me that while that may be true for institutions, it's also true for individuals. And I think the president's CV and what he has done as a president, I think by any measure we would say he's been a great president and a great man, but he's also been a good man. And that's what I want to acknowledge today, because these are not usually the things that find their ways into CVs or into bios or into public relations. So, yeah. Thank you, and I'm going to tell you why I think that, because I've had the pleasure of serving President Wilson for the entire 10 years, or nearly 10 years. But you can see greatness, but you can also, I've had the privilege of seeing goodness, and I see it in things like his humility, to listen to every person and every idea and go with the best idea, whether that comes from him or not. By the way, it usually does come from him. In his generosity, not just with his money, but from his time, with his time. With the most busy schedule on campus, he always finds time to speak to people, to speak especially to students, and often students who really need help in some way, those who are struggling. And somehow he finds the time always to do that. You can see it in his resolve to take the harder path or to make the tougher decision because it is the right decision, even if it's not necessarily popular or necessarily expedient. You can see it in his work ethic, which is indefatigable. He is always here and always committed to Wayne State University, and it's tireless. He doesn't seem to ever tire. During the pandemic, when he had free time at night, when a lot of us were doing puzzles and watching Netflix, he was writing a book. That's a good use of time. By the way, that book is still available on University Press, and I saw people over here with it. I guess most for me, that goodness is exhibited in forbearance, in ignoring criticism or choosing not to fight when one can clearly win. There's this beautiful line in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure which says, "Oh, it is excellent to have the power of giants, but it is tyrannous to use it as a giant." And in a culture where we often celebrate power and vengeance, the president exhibits things like mercy and forgiveness and magnanimity, which are virtues that I think are underappreciated today and certainly underutilized. So for me, it's been a pleasure to serve with President Wilson. We don't always connect goodness and greatness, I think, but with him, it's exhibited for all to see. It has been a pleasure for me to serve President Wilson, who is a great president, who is a great man, but even better than that, is a good man. So now I will ask President Wilson and Dean Corvino to come to the stage and have their conversation. And after that, we're going to mingle for a little bit, so enjoy yourselves and this conversation as well.
Good morning.
Hi, John.
Let me first of all thank Michael for that really beautiful introduction. Thank you very much, Michael.
So, as before, I'm going to start with easy warm-up questions. What did you do this weekend?
You know, there's this a group that I belong to, a group of African American men who basically, as far as I can tell, we socialize 4 times a year. I got elected to this group over a year ago, but I haven't had a chance to do any of the socializing. So this was my first one, and this was in Amelia Island, Florida.
I don't want to. So you travel a lot, Amelia Island, Florida, right? So
Usually for work. This time it was
you're right.
all social.
I don't want to say the waning days of your presidency because that sounds like a diminution of energy, and that's certainly not the case. But have you been sort of adjusting your free time as you plan to exit the presidency?
I haven't had any free time, John.
Yeah, right.
You know what time I've had outside of what I do at Wayne State. It's really been consumed with packing and moving into. Jacqueline and I bought a house in Pleasant Ridge recently, and we're kind of day by day just moving things over there. And she's not here now because she's got 4 different deliveries coming today, and she had to be there for that. And so it's actually been very busy.
I can sympathize with the moving thing.
Yeah.
We just moved out of our house actually this morning.
Okay.
So, you came to Wayne State 10 years ago, and you articulated a vision for a preeminent public urban research university. Take stock of where we are with respect to that vision.
Yeah, I think it's an evolution. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're headed in the right direction. We had a couple of things we really had to do in order to be even considered in the conversation. One, of course, was increase our graduation rates. We had a precipitous decline in research in the decade, before I came here. We had to turn that around, and we've had some headwinds. Certainly the legislature has not been kind to us from a financial perspective. We've been the university that's been, I guess, most punished over the past 10 years. And so we've had to do some belt tightening and some other things that some other universities probably didn't have to do quite as much. But I think we're in the right direction, and I think the next president has a great foundation to work with to bring us to the next level.
Are there things that you think we're really, really close to that you said to yourself as you were thinking about stepping down, maybe I should stick around for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the defining issues of the next 5 years is going to be whether or not we can get a reliable hospital partner that supports the academic mission of the medical school. And there's still work that has to be done there. And that's medicine is kind of my thing. And I like to be able to help with that because I think it is so important for Wayne State.
Do you think you will help with that?
I am not going to butt in.
Mm-hmm.
I think the new president needs to do what the new president wants to do. If I'm asked, I will certainly be available and will help. If I'm asked by the new person, then I very much will do whatever I can to be helpful. But I'm not going to butt in. I'm going to.
Yeah. Aside from the hospital partner for the medical campus, what are some other things that you think of as sort of unfinished business that you look forward to?
Well, there's one thing that is I don't know if you call it unfinished business because it's kind of a new project, but I think it's an important one for Wayne State. And it really became crystallized during the pandemic. Detroit needs a school of public health. And, there were some conversations with Henry Ford about a new school of public health. That died out when the merger did not go through. But we still need a school of public health here in Detroit. And I've been working for the past 3 or 4 months to try to get some funding for that. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get this done before I leave, but I can get things started. And Patrick Linda tells me, I met with him as recently as this morning, that we're in good position to get some funding from the legislature to be able to get started on this on a new school of public health. We've been meeting. Faculty have been meeting. They're enthusiastic about it. We have a lot of great faculty who have expertise in that area, and we just need to formalize it around the school.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the pandemic. Talk about the ways that the pandemic shaped your presidency. It was obviously a defining moment, I would assume.
Well, I think that the pandemic, shaped everyone in a different way. Not just the presidency. I think as an institution that we came out of it pretty well. I'm very thankful to the Public Health Committee headed by Lori Clabo over here, who really guided us in I'm told we're one of the only universities in the country that didn't contribute to community spread, and that's something to be proud of. And we did something which very few universities did, which I still don't understand why they didn't, and that is we instituted what I call trigger metrics, so that we can take the emotion out of making decisions when certain metrics were reached, that it was automatic to be able to if a certain metric was reached, we would shut down this or shut down that or shut down the entire campus, and take out the biases that come into play when you don't have these things preset. And I think that was very helpful. So I think from that standpoint, I think we did well. The pandemic really also, as far as higher education is concerned, I think one of the things that it did, which is really good for higher ed, I believe, is made things a lot more flexible. I think much more flexible in terms of how we deliver instruction. A lot of faculty, not only here but elsewhere, very resistant to teaching online, and there was a bias, against it. I think we learned some things about that, and I think certainly that serves more students than than previously, to have that kind of flexibility. But I think also from a curriculum standpoint, I think that we become much more open to different needs that students have, and teach curriculum that is in some ways much more tailored to what their needs are. And so from that standpoint, I think the pandemic has some positive effects on higher ed.
You say that the pandemic was a defining moment for everybody, which of course is true. But I think particularly with respect to the presidency, with all due respect, you don't give yourself enough credit, because there are big decisions to be made during an event like that, and they could be life or death decisions. Were there times where you were nervous, anxious?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, there's a lot of time. But, it helps to have a good partner through this. And I had Lori Clabo, and we talked about things a lot. And she had her committee. And I think the cabinet was, my cabinet was also very, very helpful. None of these decisions were made by me solely. It was always with tremendous amount of discussion and really thinking about alternatives, and only then making decisions that we thought were most science-based and in the best interest of the university. And for the most part, I think we got it right, and I think that's a credit to everybody involved.
I like the way you emphasize the collaborative nature of the decision-making. It's funny, you know, I've been involved in a number of dean searches and other searches recently, and one of the questions we always ask is, describe your leadership style, and they always begin with collaborative. And I'm waiting for somebody to begin with mercurial, you know. But it sounds like you really valued the team. Do you want to elaborate on that as a leader?
Well, you know, I think you really can't ask people what their leadership style is because they're biased. And you know, so I remember, like you know, I've also interviewed a lot of people for, you know, positions, and I remember interviewing a person for a chair position, and he told me exactly on a very detailed scenario how he would act in a certain kind of situation, and we hired him, and then that situation came, he did the exact opposite. So, you know, so these things I think happen. You know, I think, you know, you have to ask others who you know, observe you know, how a leader is like, and what their style is like. I like to think that groups of people make better decisions than any single person. I think that's been proven. I like to think that diverse thinking is always better than uniform thinking, and so I value, you know, diversity, as you know, and I you know, those are just values that I have, that I try to lead by.
Can you say a little bit more about diversity? Because you were president during a time where a lot of people were talking about DEI, but we also made significant strides on this campus in DEI.
Yeah, you know, one of the, you know, when I wrote my letter almost a year ago now, announcing that I was not going to be renewing my contract, I mentioned a kind of a metaphor that Wayne State gave me my voice, that I think that a leader is most effective when they can find their voice. And what I meant by that, at least partly what I meant by that, is that, you know, my values and that of Wayne State, I think, in many ways was syncing up well. There were many institutions that I've led in the past where, you know, I didn't always feel like I could be myself, that I wouldn't be true to myself if I acted a certain way. And at Wayne, one of the things that I value so much is that these values kind of synced up well. And one of those is the value of diversity and inclusion and equity. You know, my life's work in medicine has been on health disparities and trying to find equity. So you know, Wayne State, I think, more than any other institution that I'm aware of, really also values that, and it shows in so many different ways. I can't even imagine now being president of some universities in some states in this country where you know, they're politicizing everything, and diversity, unfortunately, is one of the things that's being politicized. I just couldn't even, and I couldn't stick around and not voice, you know, some opposition if I were in a state that was doing something that was, you know, totally contrary to what my values and beliefs are. And so I'm just really glad that I'm, you know, stepping down when I am. I don't have to deal with that kind of stuff. And that at least during the time that I've been here, that the values of Wayne State and mine have been very much in sync.
You made reference in your answer to your life's work. I'm thinking of a conversation I had with Dr. David DiChiara, who was the founder of the Michigan Opera Theater, now Detroit Opera, a number of years ago. And I was in my 40s at the time, and I was saying to him how I'm realizing that this is my life. My life is always going to be some version of this. And David, who was in his 70s at the time, said, yeah, imagine what it's like from my perspective, looking back and saying, this was my life. I mean, you know, he didn't realize it, but he, you know, he would develop cancer in a few years and die. But he was looking backwards. You talk about your life's work. You still have, I mean, you're retiring from the presidency, but you still have life and time left. How are you thinking now about this sort of big picture of your life? I mean, you wrote a memoir, so that got you thinking about the big picture. You've been thinking about the big picture. But where is that for you?
Yeah. You know, my son, when he was younger, once told me, this was after, I used to take him to medical meetings with me, and he knew some of my patients when I was seeing patients, and he was pretty involved. And when I went into administration after a few years, he was still very young, and once he told me, he said, Dad, you know, you used to look into people's eyes and help them. Now all you do is sit behind the desk and push paper around, you know? And I remember telling him, I said, Yosh, yeah, okay, I did help people, but I'm still helping people. It's just different. It's through policy, and it's through decisions that impact not the individual sitting right across from me, but bigger groups of individuals. I think he was too young to understand at the time, but I think he's, you know, understands it now. I'm looking forward to this next stage of my career. You know, I started off as someone who took care of patients and did research and mentored residents and fellows, and you know, I loved doing that. For at least 20 years, maybe, you know, longer than that, I've put that aside and have focused on, you know, leading institutions and getting out of my comfort zone and doing things that I didn't necessarily like doing, but I felt I had to do. And it's been wonderful. I feel like I've, you know, have been able to make some impact. But I'm looking forward to doing the things that I enjoy doing. And so this next, and it's interesting because, you know, once you announce that you're not going to, you know, renew your contract or whatever, then all these other presidencies come up and people are asking you to, you know, come and take a look at this or take a look at that. And maybe another time in my career I would have been interested in some of these, but I'm really focused now on doing what my son said many years ago, you know, help people.
So I think that's a real adjustment for leadership, is learning to adapt to the very different sense of satisfaction, the different reward structure. I remember not long before I became dean, I was at a reception and I ended up sitting next to Christopher Eisgruber, who's the president of Princeton. And I said, I'm about to become a dean, and do you have any advice for a new dean? And he said, you know, when you're early in your academic career, there are things that, you know, you learn to get excited about because that's how you're trained and you're programmed. Oh, I got this new publication. Oh, I got this new grant. Oh, you know, they accepted my book at the press, et cetera. You know, and for you, it's, oh, I helped this patient with their glaucoma. Oh, I, you know, got this grant. Oh, I, you know, published this paper. He said, then when you become an academic leader, you need to learn to get a sense of satisfaction. Oh, I managed to get through that meeting without anybody screaming at each other. Oh, I managed to calm that person down. Did it take a while for you to find satisfaction in those leadership activities?
You know, without going through my entire career, let me just summarize by saying that I didn't have a typical progression in my career from junior faculty to more senior faculty to administrative position and then higher administrative position. My first job was chair of ophthalmology, and I was a dean of a medical school, 6 years after that. And so I didn't really ever. I never had a period where I was a junior faculty person. I had to always do things concurrently. Having said that, it was very difficult to give up my ophthalmology when I really got into administration, because for 15, 20 years, I was able to do both. I still did my ophthalmology, I still did glaucoma, and I still did administrative stuff. But patient care takes a lot of time, particularly if you do it right and you want to give your patients your attention. And at some point, I just couldn't do that anymore and do the administrative work that I was doing. And so that's when that change kind of occurred for me. And yes, it is hard. But I did it in phases. My last surgery that I did was 2006, 2005 going on 2006. But I still saw patients for a while. And then the last time I saw patients was when I was at the NIH. I still saw some celebrity patients. And when I came here, I went cold turkey. No more patients. But that's a long period of time to kind of phase in. And so I didn't really have the typical kind of progression that you were referring to.
Are you thinking of seeing patients again?
I am, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I was sent a series of questions ahead of time, and I was told that I could ad-lib freely. But this next question I'm going to read verbatim. Okay, I'm definitely going to put you on the spot with my next question. I mean, why not? You're running out of days to fire me.
Okay, I can see it coming.
Which to me is a good reason for me not to ask that question today, to wait. Anyway, so, but here it is. Could you describe your worst moment as president?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a few. Out of many. But two of my worst moments that I have to just say is the death of a law student who was killed off campus and at the Packard plant, Tiana Brown. That to me was just a devastating time for me. And also the death of Colin Rose, one of our public safety officers. That was just a horrendous time for me. So I've got to say those two. But it wouldn't. I would lack credibility, and people would discount everything else I'm going to say from this point on if I didn't also say that the issues I had to deal with between 2018 and 2020 with the then dysfunctional board was also very, very difficult. And I'm not going to go into that, and there was 7 or 8 specific instances that I could mention, but I don't want to identify anyone or anything like that. And so let me just globally just say that was a very tough time with many difficult moments.
What got you through that?
Well, not that I'm plugging my memoir, but
Available at stores near you.
but I've dealt with some tough things
Yeah.
in my life, and the topic of my memoir is the plum tree blossoms even in winter, to signify that even in the worst of times, that there's something to look forward to, some positive. And that's been my philosophy. It's been my life. It's been how I've gotten through. And so I've been able to withstand these periods of difficulty by persevering and calling on resilience and whatever other life experiences that I've had that have strengthened and hardened me to deal with these things.
So I read your memoir. I really enjoyed it. I planned to read it again before today's interview, but packing. And you shared a lot of very personal things. One of the things that really surprised me is that when you were younger, at least, you were a fighter. You tended to lose your temper. You were like the last person I would expect to jump across the conference table and physically throttle somebody. So what was it like sharing those personal things about yourself?
Yeah, let me just say first of all that in the back of my mind, I thought at some point I would write a memoir. But honestly, it was going to be after I was no longer employed because I didn't think that I would have a job after I, wrote a memoir and told about my life. But the pandemic happened, and I had a little bit of time, so I went ahead and wrote it. And one of the things that, and I'm glad I did because of several things. One, I think, it probably has more impact while I'm a sitting president to, write something like that, as opposed to, retired. But the other is that through that process, it made me really understand that we all have human frailties, all of us, and but there's also good in most of us, and that's what I tried to portray. Both my parents, that in the early chapters, I talk about their frailties and how much it impacted me in a negative way. But then in the later chapters, I talk about how good they were as people and that they have resolved whatever the issues were. And, and it helped me to also do the same, to not be judgmental, and to reconcile. And that's not something that I probably would have been able to do without having gone through this. I hadn't spoken to my sister in decades, and now we speak, on a routine basis, for example.
You seem to have a very nuanced appreciation of the complexity of human beings and their good and bad. We are at a time right now where we are deeply polarized, and that's boiling up a lot on college campuses. What is your perspective, given that nuanced appreciation, what is your perspective on sort of the state of that polarization today?
Yeah, I actually have a chapter on that in my book. I just think it's terrible. I think that I think now is a good time for me to be getting out of the college presidency. It's a tough job already, and to have to deal with the polarization and the politics and it just makes it even harder. And I don't think it's good for the kids. I think that we're losing focus on why we're here, and it's for them. And it's a tough environment that's getting even tougher. One of the main things is things that we have to deal with right now, and it's really hard for people to understand, is the whole, Second Amendment free speech issue.
First Amendment.
Yeah, First Amendment, free speech issue, because it's people say things and it's just horrific sometimes, and reaction is to fire people and punish them in some way or whatever, and you just can't. I mean, it's just the First Amendment just prohibits certain actions. And then, there's always people that think that you didn't do enough, and then another group that thinks you went too far, and there's just no middle ground in just about anything these days. And I'm someone who likes to try to find the middle ground and reach solutions, and I just think that it's harder to do that.
Do you think Wayne State, because of its diversity, because of the sort of spirit of the city of Detroit, is well situated to confront these kinds of challenges?
I think it is, but I think that, these things can be very mercurial, and change can happen, very quickly. I mean, look what's happened in Florida. I mean, not only is DE&I under attack, but tenure is under attack, and so many things that people would have thought would have taken decades is happening in a matter of months to a year. So these things are very mercurial, and who knows? I mean, with all due respect to the board members we have here, there'll be new ones soon, and who knows?
Yep. Speaking of which, I did not, on opening, acknowledge the board members here: Board Chair Mark Gaffney, Board Member Shirley Stancato, and Board Member Marilyn Kelly.
Yeah. I'm glad you did that, because as I was thinking about it, I just thought, oh, gee, I didn't acknowledge the board members, but so you did that for me. Thank you.
That goes back to the question that I read, running out of days to fire you. So we have time for a few more questions. You were named last week to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How does that feel? I mean, silly question, but how does that feel?
Well, John, I was elected to the National Academy of Medicine 20 years ago, 2003, and that was a fabulous, I was really excited, and that was a very important day for me. But I can't say that it was totally unexpected at that time. My personal brand, if you will, is very identified with medicine. And so, I was surprised, yes, but it wasn't totally unexpected in terms of at some point being elected to the National Academy of Medicine. This is different. This is, not medicine. And this is, all of the arts and the sciences. And I will say that it just floored me that, particularly at this point in my career, that being recognized for something that is, outside of medicine, which, as I mentioned, I feel like that's been something I've been very heavily identified with. So it's been still very much elated by it.
You are somebody who has often talked about the importance of integrating the humanities with the sciences. You read regularly. You've shared on your weekly messages the books you've read. Could you say more about that sort of holistic approach? Because I think that there's often a real divide between the humanities folks and the STEM folks. And
Yeah, I mean, you know, I got introduced to the humanities by my mentor in high school, Miss Steffen, who, you know, made me read, basically a book almost every other day in lieu of regular English assignments, and was also took a interest in exposing me to the arts, museums and symphonies and theater, and it's just something that I've valued over these very many years. And you know, again, to invoke something in my book. I've always been admired the samurais of Japan, and people think of them as brutal killers and so forth. And there was a phase in which they were that. But then when Japan entered into a more peaceful time, the samurais became very educated and appreciated the arts and wrote about it and became philosophers and artists and somehow was able to meld the two, the physical, with the mental, and in a harmonious whole. And I've always been very influenced by that, and so I feel very strongly about the humanities and the arts. And I think one of the things that people are surprised about, I guess, because they, oh, a doctor, he's just going to care about the medical school, is that actually, I one of the most significant things that I think that I'm proudest of is the opening of the Hillberry Gateway Theater, because I think that the arts is and I mentioned that in the opening, is really kind of the heart and soul of the body.
a lot of our warrior branding, because you were talking about samurais and made me think of this, a lot of our warrior branding has happened under your presidency. I think we switched from Tartars before you.
Yeah.
But a lot of the the emphasis of the shield and so on. Do you think of the sort of warrior brand as the educated, peaceful warrior when you think about our warrior branding?
Yeah, what I think about in terms of our warrior branding is being able to be strong, resilient, be well, sort of like the whole concept of the borrowed, which is a cyclist who goes out on their own, attacks the peloton, is able to withstand. So I think of our warrior branding as being resilient and being able to stand strong and take what comes to them and being able to somehow make it a positive. So it's something that I dwell on a lot. When I'm particularly in a physical situation like long distance cycling or something, and I'm really tired. I think of the warrior brand, and I think of the adversities our students have had to go through, and I feel like, oh, this is nothing, and just be able to soldier through. So it's not, to me, it's not a violent brand. It's really more of a
Resilient brand?
Yeah, resilient brand. Yeah.
Last question. What has surprised you most about being president of Wayne State, and what will you miss most? That's a two-part question.
I don't think I've been surprised by anything at Wayne State. I'm pretty much, I did my homework before I took the job. But the thing that I think I'll miss the most, and I've been in academics my entire career, from 1986 well, 85 really, but so that's a long time. And and I've only had a bit of a hiatus from academic university life when I went to the NIH. And during that time when I was at the NIH, I really missed university life and decided I wanted to go back to being a university president. But the reason why I missed it so much is probably twofold. One is the academic cadence, the day-to-day having to make decisions, and that's impactful, and the interactions that one have not only with other administrators but with faculty and with students. There's just a certain academic cadence that I miss that when I was at the NIH. But the other is that the potential impact that you can have, particularly on young people. I think those are the things that I'm going to miss the most, and so I'll have to find ways to be able to fulfill that in some other ways. Obviously, one way is impacting the person that I'm trying to take care of on a one-to-one basis. But another is, some of the national boards that I'm on, and that relates to research or policy or something like that, and trying to, have an impact that's more far-reaching, but not with the usual cadence of a university life.
I think I speak for everyone here when I say that your impact on Wayne State will have lasting effects for generations. Let's thank President Emory Wilson.
Thank you.